All right, good afternoon, everybody. Here with Josh and Paul. Colonel Mellekas is here with us as well, who oversees the Connecticut State Police. We'll talk a little bit about the demonstrations in a minute. Quick COVID-19 daily summary. Fatalities. That's the lowest fatality rate we've had in months, certainly since March. That's extraordinary good news. The positive cases, 239 out of 9,252 tests. That positivity rate, about 3%, probably the lowest we've had since March. And overall, over the last week, our positivity is under 5%. So these are all trends in the right direction. Obviously, we've had a couple of good days of testing in the sense that we've got over 9,000 tests. Which is there. You can do that next slide if you want, the testing overview. But that said, remember, we have a lot of capacity in terms of our testing. And Luke Bronin, the mayor in Hartford, reminded me that we have the Hartford, Connecticut Rapid Testing Site in Pope Park at the Arroyo Center, at Pope Park in the Arroyo Center. Right now, there's a lot of testing there, absolutely no cost, no doctor's permission needed, more testing capacity than people getting tested right now. And I was talking to Josh, we're also trying to work with businesses so we can get you introduced to some of the labs so you can provide more testing on your own for employees as needed. We got the capacity, now we need people to get tested. Also, I think you see on this testing overview, the testing has slowly been going up and the positivity rate has been going down, certainly a lot since the month of May. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we saw last night on TV. It was a split screen, I think you've got to admit. The President of the United States, there he was, I think it was the Rose Garden, talking about dominating and crushing the terrorist protesters and step up and use the guard. And I was sort of interested hearing the words of, Mayor Bronin, because we had protests, peaceful protests, right out here behind the Capitol building. Then they went down to a Hartford Police headquarters where, Luke Bronin addressed the group and said, if you're not heartbroken by what you saw happen to George Floyd, if you're not heartbroken, then you're not a human being, he said. And if you're not angry what happened to George Floyd, you're not an American. And he said, if you think it was an isolated incident, you're just not paying attention. That was the split screen. And then here in Hartford, the demonstrators kept going. They went all the way up to I-84, which is not where they should have gone, and it's dangerous. But it got a little testy up there. And at the same time, you maybe saw the split screen in Washington, D.C., where there are very peaceful protesters out in front of the White House. And they called in the cavalry. They came in on horses. They had rubber bullets. They had pepper spray and dispersed the crowd. On I-84, it was different. We worried a lot, Stavros, didn't we? In terms of it's unsafe, wanted to get those people off of I-84, tried some reasoning, thinking about would we have to arrest anybody. I personally was hoping it was going to start raining. But fundamentally, people were Calves, Lieutenant Gun Calves from Troop H. He was talking to some of the protesters, and one of them said, would you pray with me? And he and a number of the other state police who were there said, we will pray with you because we're all Americans. We all decry what happened, and we all want to keep the peace. And you'll see photographs of the protesters and some of our police officers locking arms. A number of them prayed. Reverend said a prayer. And then people dispersed. And that was the Connecticut way. And we're not naive. Believe me, Stavros Mellekas is not naive. We see the social media. We know the risks out there. But I want to make sure that each and every one of you know that we're trying to do this the Connecticut way. And so far, no arrests last night, no looting, and I really hope we can make sure that we can solve COVID and we can solve the heart and hurt we feel. Somebody else is going to be here available to answer questions. That's Tony Reyes. He's from the New Haven, he's chief of the New Haven Police Department. And Tony was just, reminding me that as the consternation and anger over the George Floyd incident began bubbling up, he rallied the police in New Haven and reminded them why they're police and why they represent the community. They're there to keep the community safe. I believe they all were there to reiterate their public oaths, why they are a municipal police and what that means. And so far, we've held the peace there as well. And Tony, I don't know if you'd like to say anything, or we can just open it up to the press and take any questions we've got. Let's just take some questions, Max.
News 8.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you, Max. Governor, you spoke about a real poignant moment in this yesterday on Interstate 84. And I'd be interested to hear what Mr. Mellekas, how he reacts to that as well. But also, Governor, you talked about keeping the peace here. I know you have to have a plan in place if that doesn't remain that way and you can't continue to go the Connecticut way. What would it take for you to have to bring in the National Guard, and how much thought goes into that?
A lot of thought goes into that. Stavros, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Yes, Governor. Commissioner Rovella put me in charge of the state police, and he instilled a philosophy that it works with the community. We share that with our commanders and our supervisors that are out there now on the road. And something you got to remember is all our troopers are human beings. They have a heart, use common sense and decency. So we encourage, independent thinking and using reasonable logic. So Lieutenant Gonkoff was on scene, and when they offered that to him, he established a rapport, and they offered that to say a prayer. If that comforts the individuals and they got their point across, the most important thing for us to do was maintain the peace in Connecticut. We didn't want any injuries, and we wanted to resolve the situation as soon as possible. The whole situation was resolved in 33 minutes, and then the protesters cleared the highway. It was an excellent job by all personnel out there, and they followed our leadership. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to duck your question on the Guard. Look, it's the last thing that I want to do. I love having the municipal police and the state police of the community. They know the community leaders. I know what that represents. We've kept our Guard pretty busy, by the way. You maybe know they were building field hospitals for us until recently, then taking them down as we saw the COVID surge. They've been helping to deliver and monitor all the PPE, the protective gear we need, making sure it goes out to folks as needed. I hope they can be there, helping us on that front line, and we won't need them in terms of keeping the peace. Right now, the municipal and the state police are doing very well, working closely with the protesters who have peace in mind.
Fox 61.
Good afternoon, Amanda Rouse with Fox 61. Governor, I wanted to know what your administration is doing specifically to address what these protesters are asking for here in the state of Connecticut.
Well, first of all, they want accountability, and I'll be working with Rovella, pushing the DA, making sure that we can provide accountability and give you confidence that our police, state, municipal are there representing you, representing the community, and you have, because public health and public safety is based on trust, and we got to maintain that. More broadly, as I've said before, I want to make sure that you can look at your government and say, I see people like me up there. I know this is a government that has people like me understand maybe who I am and what I'm trying to go through. So that's why, for me, it's been so important, the incredible diversity of our administration, starting off, as you heard me say before, when it comes to municipal police and state police and teachers, and now I'm focused on judges. We got to do a better job of making sure the amazing diversity, which makes Connecticut so special, is represented in all these groups.
And my next question would be for Chief Reyes. We've seen community policing for years in New Haven, and that seem to work in the past, and officers do have a good rapport with a lot of the different community members. What's being done now to address what might be a new group who is demanding action and accountability from police officers?
Thank you for that question, Amanda. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the time where we capitalize on the relationships that we've built, the longstanding relationships we've built with the cross section of members in our communities, not just faith leaders, but our civic leaders and our young folks. We have seen that many of the protesters are young people, and they're looking for a different type of change. They're looking to be heard. And so we are working with our youth organizations proactively to engage these young folks. We're actually setting up a meeting as we speak right now with some of the organizers. We're trying to see if we can proactively meet with them behind the scenes, because I think we need to listen. We need to take this moment to really listen to their concerns, identify those concerns, and actually take actionable steps towards moving closer to addressing those concerns. So we're capitalizing on those relationships and making sure that they represent everyone in the community, including our young folks.
Move along next.
Thank you.
News 12 Connecticut.
Hi, Governor. I want to go back to specific ways to address the protesters' concerns. Talked to the ACLU today. They said that they want specific legislation that would create an independent review commission to investigate any officer-involved death. That would include an outside attorney appointed, essentially like a special counsel, who would decide on charges instead of some sort of prosecutor. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's take a look at it. I know we've got a number of judicial review teams right now that take a look at this, but I think, Stavros, maybe something we ought to think about.
And Governor, a follow-up question on that. The ACLU also wants you to add police reform legislation to this month's special session. Any chance of that happening?
I don't know what that means. Police reform legislation. I'm all in favor of police reform legislation.
But would you add it to the special session that is scheduled for later this month on COVID response?
It's just too vague. I don't know what police reform legislation means, but I'm happy to find out.
NBC Connecticut. NBC Connecticut. Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
Hey, Governor, following up on some of these, the questions, I was talking with protesters yesterday. They were very encouraged to see the solidarity from you, from the mayors, from the police departments, but they still say that more needs to be done. And you were talking about, what we could see in the future, but what are some of the things in the immediate future, in the next few days, in the next few weeks, that you're going to be taking to the protesters to say, here's an example of how we are trying to unify this?
I think the most important thing we can do, look, you heard Chief Reyes talk, and our opportunity to open up the dialogue with the ministers or open up the dialogue with the protest leaders, make sure that they know that Chief Reyes is doing everything he can. He's talked to his force, as I told you early on, making sure they understand the higher values that they represent. The people that he represents were as shocked by what happened to George Floyd as anybody in the state of Connecticut. And we're trying every day to prove to the protesters and prove to the greater Connecticut community, this is a lesson we don't have to learn, but we're going to make sure we live those principles every day.
Connecticut Mirror.
Good afternoon. Governor, a few moments ago you referred to you not being naive and based on what you've seen on social media about the potential for unrest. What are you talking about? What are the things you've seen or your intel people have seen on social media that raises concern?
Do you want to talk about that at all, Stavros?
Sure. Yes, Governor. Well, there's two things going on, right? You have the protesters that are upset in these disturbing times, and you have agitators within the group. The protesters, they're against that. We want to identify those parties and address it accordingly. So the protesters, we want to listen to them, let them express their concerns and work with them. The agitators, they go towards looting or rioting. That's unacceptable.
If I may add, Governor.
Sure. Is that Josh?
Well,
Or no?
Chief Reyes. I think one of the most important things that we're doing is what we're seeing around the country is that many people are crossing state borders to come into specific jurisdictions to cause the looting and to engage in violence. And I think we're working right now with our federal partners to identify those individuals, if they should come into Connecticut, if they should come into our local municipalities, so that we can distinguish those folks. We can do some proactive work to arrest those folks if we indeed identify them. And because they do not represent the community. Much of the concern that we're getting from community is that they're not happy about the fact that people are coming into our cities and that they're looting and that they're creating civil unrest. This does not represent the majority of our respective communities. So it's important that we work to identify who these agitators are and that we're taking proactive measures. We're doing that on the state and local and federal level.
Chief, when you mentioned looting, are you speaking generally about what we've seen nationally, not something specific in New Haven? Is that right?
That's correct. It's not something we've seen yet. There's been no indication of that. We have seen some chatter online about looting, but there hasn't been any overt action towards looting. We have not seen that. We have not experienced that, and we hope not to. But we do, as the mayor said, we're not ignorant to the fact that there is an intent by certain agitators and certain individuals to turn to civil unrest. And so our work is being done behind the scenes to identify those individuals to see if we can prevent that before it happens.
And last question, have you seen actual incidents of that, or is this a question of concerns based on intelligence?
I would say from our part, we're concerned based on intelligence and also based on the trend that we're seeing nationally. I mean, it's incumbent upon us to follow all of it. And we are working with our federal partners and state partners to make sure that we're not missing something. But right now we're acting based on what we see, but we're being very cognizant of what's going on around the country and the temperature of social media.
Thank you.
Waterbury Republican American.
Thank you. Governor, we're getting some questions from readers concerning your mask-wearing habits and practices. I guess some are seeing video footage and photographs of you not always wearing one, but not necessarily prior to the footage being or photograph being taken. So could you tell folks what you do? What's your practices?
My practice is wear the mask whenever I'm not able to socially distance. I try and do that indoors by law, outdoors, as necessary. I saw, I was having lunch outside in Stamford the other day, and somebody asked me to stand up, and I stood up. They took a quick picture. I sat down. I probably should have had my mask because I'm the governor. I ought to be setting an example.
And could you talk a little more about the racial and ethnic breakdown of COVID cases and fatalities here in Connecticut?
You want to take that, Josh?
Sure. We publish that data daily in our metrics report. Is attached to the press release, can be found on the governor's website. As has been the case throughout this crisis, we have seen a very disproportionate impact both on cases and on fatalities with our minority communities, African Americans in particular. And it's why our testing strategy is aligned the way it is, why a lot of our community supports are designed the way they are, and our reopen plans to try to mitigate those impacts going forward.
And getting back to the mask question, what is the rationale we're not requiring someone to, who's claiming a medical exemption to provide proof of that condition.
Did you hear that, Josh? It was maybe a question about a medical exemption that wouldn't require you to wear a mask. Is that right, Paul?
Yes, yes. Why don't you have to provide proof of the underlying medical condition?
To provide proof. Well, I think one of the exemptions is for children under 2 years old. For people with underlying medical conditions, I don't, I think this is a little bit on the honor system here. I don't think there's a lot of cases where this has been an issue, but if you've become aware of any, please let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Boceto Media. Hearst, Connecticut Media.
Thanks, Max. Hey, Josh, did you see the medical examiner's report on fatalities today? COVID fatalities.
Yes.
How do you read those numbers? Are those excess deaths? Are those people who wouldn't have died otherwise? How do you read those numbers for April and May?
Yeah, so this Ken, you're referencing the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner put out data comparing each month of the year so far to the prior year's corresponding month, and it showed that over the course of January, February, and March, the number of deaths this year compared to last year in the state of Connecticut was very similar, and then in April, the number of deaths was up 137% year over year. And then in May, that started to decline, but was still up, I think, about 80% year over year. The vast majority of those increases were reflected in the COVID deaths that we report, sadly, in this press conference every day. But Ken, I think you're referring to the fact that that didn't explain all of it. There was still about 200 to 300 deaths between April and May that were not attributed to COVID, but still up from prior year. And the public health and medical professionals we've spoken to suggest that is likely a combination of potentially some COVID cases that are not identified, although we do everything we can to identify all of them. But probably more likely, much of that has to do with people avoiding care, avoiding our hospitals for critical medical procedures. We've seen that happen through April and May, and it's one of the most important reasons that the governor's been encouraging people who need acute care or have serious medical conditions to get back into the hospital to see their doctors. It's safe there, and we need people to seek the care that they need.
Thanks, Josh. Governor, your executive order last night was opening the door for people who are scared for themselves or their loved ones to go back to work because of health reasons. Does the Department of Labor have like a ballpark figure on how many people might be in that pool potentially?
I can't tell you that ballpark figure. What I can tell you is it goes from now until July 31st. We're trying to do everything we can to encourage people to get back to work safely. Some people don't feel like they can do it right now, so we're giving them a little bit of breathing room so they can plan accordingly. And that's what that executive order was meant to do.
Thanks, Governor. And could you comment directly on the president clearing Lafayette Park to go across to a church that was unaware of his arrival for a photo op last night?
I don't think I have to say much about that. I like to talk about what our chief of police and head of H Troop did here in Hartford. I think it's a startling contrast to what you saw in Washington Park.
Thanks, Governor.
The Hartford Current.
Hi, I want to ask about contact tracing. You guys said a few days ago that contact tracing was up and running in 11 of 65 districts in the state. I was just wondering if you could tell us the latest on that. And also, is there any way to quantify how much contact tracing is going on? How many, contacts have been traced?
Sure. Hey, Alex. So thanks for the question. We're up to 15 local health departments that are now using the contact platform. And we expect more to be coming online each day as our public health team continues to address requests for additional training, some additional features to make it easier for folks to use the platform. It's all the normal stuff of rolling out a new software platform. And in this case, I think with the added complexity of using one platform to connect not just the state, but with each local health department around the state, something that we don't typically do in Connecticut. Usually each town kind of rolls their own, and then we suffer the inefficiencies of that. But in this case, the state's coming together to make sure that we have full visibility of cases across the state so we can identify hotspots, bring in additional resources where needed to make sure that we keep the spread of COVID-19 as low as possible.
Mm-hmm. And so with some of these other things, like with testing, we can see the results when you release the numbers every day of how many people have been tested. So is there any comparable way to kind of watch contact tracing increase and monitor how it's increasing?
Yeah, we do plan to start including metrics on that in our reporting as this ramps up. But at this point, the health departments that have come on board are basically tracing all of their cases in contact. And so, it's just a question of getting the local health departments on board. And so we're working with them. They're under tremendous stress, as I think people know, not just for contact tracing, all their day jobs, plus helping support the reopening activities and making sure the guidelines are being enforced. So immense stress in our local health departments. Are doing an incredible job, but we're here to try to help them and bring them resources.
Thank you.
CT News Junkie.
Thanks, Max. Back on the topic of police accountability, I wanted to know, Governor, have you spoken with the new Chief State's Attorney on what he would like to see?
Want to take that, Paul?
Yeah. Actually, myself and our General Counsel, Bob Clark, had a conversation with the Chief State's Attorney. We've been in very close contact with him, including a conversation that occurred today. We're going to be looking to, the Governor will have more to provide and announce as it deals with our partnership working with all of our various partners from the legislature, Chief State's Attorney, and others in the next few days.
Okay. And the other question I had for Colonel Stavros is testing. How often are the state police or police departments getting tested?
Is that testing for COVID or testing for applications?
Testing for COVID.
So we leave that up to the, if they're symptomatic, obviously we send them to test, and we leave the option for the trooper themselves to go and get tested as they see fit.
Thank you.
The Associated Press.
Good afternoon, everyone. Governor, were you asked by the White House to provide any National Guard troops to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, they did make a broad request. I think we have responded right now that our Guard is very busy doing the COVID-related work I mentioned earlier, on standby as needed as we think about what's happening here in the state. Paul has said we did offer to provide some transport, air support, which, perhaps we'll be doing that.
So I guess that's not fair to say that we refused. You just said that we need them here on standby?
We need our Guard right here in Connecticut.
And I think we were supposed to get some information this week regarding, back to COVID, the state share of the CARES Act was supposed to go to cities and towns. Where does that stand? Because I know that CCM has registered their complaints that they haven't received the money yet.
I can tell you that Melissa McCall, we've got the itemized expenses, COVID-related expenses from now all 169 towns. I think we're going to be able to announce within a day or so that we'll be able to make full payment on that to all the municipalities. Do you know the timing on that, Paul?
We're going to be looking for a timing, so you'll have an official announcement on Thursday. As the governor stated, OPM made out a request to all the municipalities. We're waiting for some few municipalities to provide back their comments. Remember, this funding is from reimbursement only in terms of COVID-related response. It was important for us as the state of Connecticut to get all of those responses from all 169 towns. That guidance has been provided to all of them, as well as to CCM and to cost, and we'll have the final announcement based upon that information on Thursday.
Thank you. And one quick question. I've seen some things on social media that some nursing home workers are concerned that they might have to pay for the weekly tests. Is that true?
No, that's not true. They will not have to pay for the test.
Okay, thank you.
WTIC 1080 News.
Good afternoon. Given the president's statement of last night, if he deems that police here are not doing a good enough job putting down protesters, as he put it, and he sends the military in, I mean, everybody's wondering what the heck happens then. Is that a constitutional crisis, or will the U.S. military come in to U.S. cities and just roll wherever they want?
Last month, he was going to have a mandatory quarantine of the greater New York area, and everybody was not going to be able to go back and forth. There's a lot of ideas that pop up, and I'm not going to overreact to any one of them. I think we are handling the situation here in Connecticut. I hope to God that the protesters think we're doing a good job. We're working together on this, and I hope he'll be able to learn from our example.
Do you have to war game that at all about the possibility? Maybe I should ask the state police here.
We have not war gamed any of that out.
Connecticut Public Media.
Good afternoon. We asked yesterday if putting a curfew in place in maybe some cities would be something you'd consider, and yesterday the answer was no. Just wondering if, with protests today and the ones going across the country, if that has changed at all.
I don't think so. Stavros may have a different point of view, but I looked around the state. I saw what was going on in cities around the country. I saw the arson. I saw some looting. I saw a lot of arrests. I saw pepper spray, and I didn't see that in Connecticut. As I said, I don't think there were any arrests here last night, and I don't believe there's any looting. That said, you know, there are a lot of agitators out there. As Chief Reyes said, if 95% of the protesters want to do this peacefully to make a case that deserves to be heard, maybe there are a few outliers on the left and right who are trying to create a confrontation. I don't think that requires a curfew, no.
And last question, is there a concern that, I mean, we're in a pandemic, there's people gathering now to protest, that this could spike the coronavirus rates here throughout Connecticut? Yeah,
I get nervous about that. Thank God I see these photographs, and almost all people are wearing the mask, which is really good. You know, I told Stavros I was really happy on I-84 that they said a prayer and stood up and locked arms. That's not exactly keeping with my social distancing protocols, but I think I'll make an exception in that case, Stavros. But yeah, I look around, I look at the beaches, I look at the casinos, I look at the protests, and I worry that people forget we're still not through the worst pandemic that's ever hit this country.
Buffering.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. Any more questions from Connecticut Public Media? We'll move along next to the Day of New London.
Hello, Governor. Given how well the COVID metrics are trending, I wanted to ask if it could ever be that they would get to a point that you would reconsider the pace at which you're reopening. I'm thinking mainly about indoor dining at the restaurants, which we keep hearing about. Could things go so well that you would move up the date?
Look, we are definitely looking at it carefully. We're going to make announcements regarding, you know, outdoor events later on this week. We just got the outdoor dining going over the last couple of weeks. Massachusetts and New York aren't even there at this point. But yeah, we'll look at these metrics over a period of time. In the last question, though, we talked about all the potential flare-ups given some of the changed situation we have in terms of protests and beaches and the such. So I do want to be careful.
Thank you.
I guess I'm getting the symbol that that's our last question. I just want to say, I was out at Pratt & Whitney today. They make the most sophisticated jet engines, you know, in the world. And they were there sort of thanking the state of Connecticut. They were able to build jet engines over the last 3 months. They told me where most other states shut down manufacturing. They pointed out to me that March was probably their biggest month ever in terms of 500 jet engines out there. One reason they were able to do it because of the International Aerospace Machinists working closely with management, putting in place really important safety protocols, the infrared thermometers, the masks, the social distancing. They changed the nature of the floor a little bit. They've been able to manage through COVID in a very safe way. And talking about safe, I want to give a little shout out to the guys in Vault 5 who are doing the safety testing on the next generation jet engines out there. Appreciated the time to everybody. It's just one more example. If we do it right, we can do it safely.